My name is Alana Blumenthal, and I am the director of the Brigham City Museums. I am delighted to welcome you to tonight's very special event in honor of the opening of the Year Retrospect, Utah North to South. This project has been a labor of love for our whole team, and we are so excited to share some of it with you tonight. It is my honor and responsibility to begin by acknowledging that our museum sits on land that is sacred to the northwestern band of the Shoshone Nation. It has been their stewardship for time immemorial to care for this land and all of its inhabitants. We honor the memory of their ancestors, their physical presence in our region today, and their resilience in preserving their connections to this place. We honor the people, we honor the land. Brigham City Museum of Art and History is a department of the Brigham City Corporation. This exhibit was made possible thanks in part to the support of the Box Elder Museum Foundation, the Utah Division of Arts and Museums, and our community members. This program is supported in large part by the National Endowment for the Humanities and Utah Humanities as part of the American Recovery Plan Act. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities or Utah Humanities. Now, I would like to introduce our panel of experts and invite them to share some thoughts on tonight's theme. Each will have a chance to present in turn, and then we will allow some time for questions at the end. Then, once the symposium has concluded, Russell will be available downstairs in the gallery to discuss his work and the process that led to this exhibit. We'll start with David. David Ericson established David Ericson Fine Art in 1978, specializing in Utah painting and sculpture. He has been heavily involved in consulting for various artists and multiple art committees, including the Governor's Mansions Foundation Board, Salt Lake County Art Advisory Board, Utah Arts Council Collection Committee, LDS Church Arts Committee, University of Utah Special Exhibitions Committee, and several others. David Ericson Fine Art has appraised a myriad of important collections throughout the country, from personal estates to various institutions in the Intermountain West. He is honored to represent many of the best artists in Utah, both past and present. David continues to research early Utah artists and Utah's unique pioneer art history. He has always emphasized the importance of building a collection by focusing on the art that you love. He has extensive knowledge of art history and specializes in early Utah and Western art. Next is Tim Newton, who served as chairman of the board and CEO at the legendary Salmagundi Club in New York City, and is the founder and curator of American Masters, an exhibition and sale at the Salmagundi. Widely acknowledged for his discerning eye, Tim is a frequent judge of national and international shows and competitions and is a sought-after commentator on the subject of art and collecting. He is the chairman of the board of the Taos Foundation in Taos, New Mexico. He also serves on the board of advisors of the Stobart Foundation, the Oil Painters of America, the Clark Hewlings Fund, and the Buffalo Bill Cody Museum. Tim is the publisher at Western Art and Architecture magazine, one of the premier art publications in America. And last, but certainly not least, is the man of the hour, G. Russell Case. Russell was heavily influenced to paint by his father, Gary Case, an accomplished painter and artist in his own right, who spent most of his career as a graphic illustrator for the federal government. After graduating from Utah State University in 1990, and with the support of his wife, Suzanne, he decided to dedicate himself to painting full-time. Russell worked primarily as a watercolor artist for many years before transitioning to his now iconic oil paintings in 1999. He has received more honors and awards over his 30-year career than I could possibly cover in a brief introduction. His work is featured in galleries and permanent collections across the West, including pieces in our own permanent collection. We are grateful that Russell and his family call Brigham City home, and for all that he does to represent the beauty of our region and our state to a national audience. And with that, I am done talking, and I will hand the microphone off to David.
I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I am flattered for Russell for all the people who are here, who would come and honor him. And he deserves every bit of it, even though he won't tell you. I was asked to give a little introduction to Utah painting. And so I brought some show and tells. The Mormons arrived in Utah in 1847. The first real artist to arrive here who continued to paint was C.C.A. Christensen. He painted this little portrait of a guy. If you look at it close, it's painted on a cover of a leather-bound book. And look at his forehead and see why it's lighter than his nose. And you can think about that for a little bit. He came to Utah in a handcart. So he walked 1,000 miles. He had 17 pounds of baggage that he could bring. We don't know how much paint he brought, but I don't think it was very much. And so when they arrived, these painters had to figure out how to paint. One of the first things they did was go up the canyon, collect the pine gum from pine trees and go boil it. And that helped them to get turpentine, and it helped them to get a base that they could then mix minerals with. And they had a very limited palette, limited colors that they could get. And that's what these guys had to do. The next year, C.C.A. Christensen, during his career, painted handcart pioneers, he painted people, he painted his friends, he painted his culture and society, which is what Russell's doing, is painting the things that he sees. The next person who came was George Martin Ottinger, who came in 1862, and he came, instead of on a handcart, he came in a to and from wagon. So they put their gear in a wagon with 4 teams of horses, and they walked to Utah. So that's how he got to Utah. And again, he didn't have very many paints and materials. This one's a watercolor. The watercolors were much more portable. This next painting is, it's not dated, but it's painted about 1866 or 67. It says Utah County between Provo and Spanish Fork, which would be Springville, where the Springville Museum is. I have a great-grandfather, that was about where his farm was. So the Utah paintings become personal to us because we're part of what's going on. In the next year came painter Dan Weglin, who came from Denmark, or no, he came from Norway. No, he came from Norway. He studied at the Royal Academy in Copenhagen. This is a little painting of his mother-in-law, who passed away in about 1881, but that's how they dressed. So again, the paintings are documents of our society and culture and what we're about. And that's why art is so important, is that they visually document what's happening in our life. I have a great-great-grandfather who's standing with a slide rule on the top of the engine at Golden Spike. So on May 10th, 1869, he was there. He was actually, previously that, he was the Royal Engineer of Sweden. And he ran all the grades from the Nevada border to Ogden, and then from Ogden to Salt Lake on all the railroads, because the railroad can only go at a 3% drop. Otherwise, the engine can't pull it up. But he was there and made sure that the railroad came into Salt Lake. And that's fun for me. The interesting thing about this, and the reason I bring it up, is that in 1869, as soon as the railroad was there, maybe the most important painter in the country at the time was Thomas Moran. And Thomas Moran took the train from New York out to Corinne, Utah, which was a city that they had built that they thought was going to be in the middle of the transportation lanes, where they transferred between Union Pacific and Central Pacific. It's about a mile from Russell and Suzanne's house. Across the river, I mean, just short distance. So Thomas Moran was here. He went from here with a big pack train, and they went up to Yellowstone Park. And William Henry Jackson was a photographer that was with them, and it was the Hayden expedition. And he did a whole series of small watercolors, about 8 by 10, because the watercolors were portable, and painted these different views of Yellowstone. He went back to Corinne, back to New York, and then he painted a 12-foot by 8-foot painting of the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. It was shown in Congress along with these watercolors that he did. And because of that, that's why Yellowstone was made the first national park. And so we have a connection right here in Brigham City to that. The other important painter who came actually before that was Albert Bierstadt, who also came through Salt Lake and Brigham City because they went up and around the lake to get to California, and he went out to California. I tell you that mostly because all of those painters that I mentioned had the best available training that they could have. And then they took that training and used watercolors and other things and planned and drew and used it to promote their career. And it's exciting to see what these people did and what people or artists are doing today. The next thing that I brought was this big poster, and I hope you can see this. This is a poster of a painting by Henry Moser. Henry Moser lived in Logan and had studied engineering in college and decided he wanted to be an artist. And he studied with A.B. Wright for a little bit, who was teaching up there. And in 1908, he went to Paris, which at that time was the greatest art school in the world. And everybody who wanted to be an artist wanted to go to Paris. Well, he went to some of the academic classes, but he ended up in classes with Henri Matisse. And Matisse was the first real colorist and the first modernist. The other person that he knew there was Picasso. And he was greatly influenced. Matisse created a school called the Fauves, or the Wild Beasts, and they were all about color. And Moser came back, and he was the Utah Fauve. Another person who was involved in that was Mahan Rai Young, a sculptor who was Brigham Young's grandson, who did the Place Monument in Salt Lake. He and his best friend in Paris was Leo Stein. They went together to Picasso's first art exhibit in Paris. Leo Stein, his sister Gertrude, and brother Michael were the first promoters of modern art in Paris and throughout the world. And here's Moser from Logan, Utah, who is right involved in that. And Moser comes back to Logan, and he starts to influence Calvin Fletcher, who's the head of the art department at Utah State. It was the Utah State Agricultural College, the AC at that time. And he convinced them that they needed to have the most cutting-edge new technology that there was. And it was too expensive to send every good student to Paris. They couldn't afford to do it. So Calvin Fletcher came up with an idea to bring great artists to Logan and teach them the current cutting-edge technology. So Calvin Fletcher brought in first Lee Randolph, then he brought in Birger Sanzane for 2 different years. Then he brought in Ralph Stackpole, brought in B.J.O. Nordfeld, who were very important national artists, and they were able to teach and train any students in Utah. The most important person from Brigham City is this artist right here. His name was Hal Rosenbaum. He lived on about 125 North Main Street in Brigham City. Anybody recognize where this is in town? Somebody said the mill. Anybody else? It's the mill. It's exactly just down Forest Street right here. And it's still there. And Hal Rosenbaum got training from Calvin Fletcher, and the other faculty members were Ev Thorpe and Reuben Reynolds. He got the technology that they got and these other guys brought in, and he went around and he spent his career painting around Brigham City. And then guess what happened in 1929? We had a great big depression, and people didn't have a dime to buy a painting from anybody. And our government was fabulous, and they created a program called the Works Project Administration, in which they provided materials for artists, and they could go out and paint, and they would pay $5 for a watercolor like that, and then they would sell them to the other government entities. So they'd sell them to the hospital, they'd sell them to the school district, they'd sell them to the city building, and they'd take the money and go back and pay the artists their $5. So that is the kind of history of what's happening around Utah. The other person that we need to talk about is LeConte Stewart, who became the head of the art department at the University of Utah. This is actually a lithograph. It looks like a drawing. But he went out and did drawings of places around that he saw. This particular one is it's Jefferson Street in Ogden. I think 25th Street and Jefferson. And he would go out and document things. He was teaching at Ogden High. He wasn't actually part of the WPA, but his goal was to do an 8 by 10 inch painting every night driving home from school. He lived in Kaysville. And so he would go out and do an 8 by 10 every night driving home. And then on Saturday, he could see the 4 or 5 that he'd done. The one that was his favorite. And then he'd take a bigger canvas and he would go out and paint a 16 by 20 on Saturday. In 1925, he was asked to go paint murals in the Mormon temple in Mesa, Arizona. So the walls were about 12 to 15 feet high and about 30 feet long, 4 walls, and he had 3 months to do it. And he learned how to mix about a 5-gallon bucket of paint, and he had 3 major buckets of those 5 gallons, and then he'd pour some of them into another one and create a gray in between. And he was able to paint those murals in that 3 months. It's really an amazing feat. When he came back to Salt Lake, it was just simple for him to do an 8 by 10, or not to do an 8 by 10, to do a 24 by 30, which is a big plein air painting. And he just used a big brush, and he'd do 2 in a day. So that's the history of kind of plein air painting and what's going on, and why we have a tradition of that. From 1930, about the time the Depression started, till 1970, there was no artist in Utah who could sustain themselves making a living painting. They did for 6 months or a year. Everybody who was painting in Utah was teaching in high school or at the university or part-time or wishing they could, and they couldn't do it. In 1970, Valois Eaton, Michael Coleman, Dennis Smith, all started to be able to make a living. If you look at the buildings on Main Street in Salt Lake, there's not a new there's one new building from 1925 until they built the ZCMI Mall, which is now gone in 1973 and 4. There's only one building that was built, and that was the First Security Bank on 4th South and Main Street. It just shows you that the economy couldn't sustain those people. Since that time, we've had a whole series of artists who have been able to take advantage of you great patrons who see a painting and say, I really love this. I want you to buy it. Now take the money and go paint a better one. It's what we're trying to do, is get Russell to go paint a better one than the one he's already done. And that's a great thing to encourage people to do. And it's a great thing to be part of. Wallace Stegner said, great art shows time and place and presence of the artist, and it shows self-discovery. So somebody who's painting real life things that they see every day is painting their time. And Russell's certainly painting places. He's painting Yellowstone Park. He's painting all the way up to see his brother in Alaska. He's regularly going down to St. George, to Scottsdale, to Santa Fe, to Oklahoma, over to Denver to a show, down to California, and he's on the move all the time. I can't keep up with him. I don't want to keep up with him, but I love to see his paintings and see the things that he's participating in. And by buying paintings, you get to participate in that same life. I do want to recognize, Gary, you get to stand up. Stand up so they can see you, so they'll come and talk to you. This is Russ's dad, Gary. And Gary was very important in Russell's life in taking him places and including him and teaching him. And we really need to honor him. And also Suzanne needs to come up, because every artist has to have a business manager and a supporter, because your income goes like this. There's nothing consistent about an artist's income. Russell painted watercolors for 20 years. Paul Bingham was one of the major people who got him painting oil paintings in 1999. And that made a big change. The self-discovery that Stegner talked about is trying to do something different on a regular basis. Try to get better. We're trying to get these artists to go paint something better than they've already done. And the presence of the artist is the marks. It's the fact that you can look at a painting across the room and say, Russell Case painted that. And that's a great thing. And it takes a lot of paintings. It takes 500 paintings to get to the point that you can do that on a regular basis. Thank you for letting me talk. I hope I didn't bore you, and enjoy your day.
It's a real honor to be here, and an honor to celebrate Russell. I've been here, I got here last night, my wife and I, and we're staying with Russell. It's been a joy to be with his family and to be around the art that he has there. He said that he basically, you've been held at bay so far because you've not been able to see the art downstairs. He said he basically emptied his whole studio, which is large. And so I was in the studio earlier today. I'm like, there's plenty of art in here. How can there be so much? I've seen the art downstairs. It's pretty remarkable. So thank you very much. I will say, just so you know, we haven't worked out the logistics of this, but so I'm the publisher of Western Art and Architecture magazine, and we did a major story on Russell. This is the August, September 2020 issue. I won't hold it open because it's too awkward, but I can get that article for you in a digital format. So if maybe the museum going forward wants to make a list, you get your emails, I'll provide you the link, and everybody can get a full copy of that article in a digital form. It's a beautiful article. Actually, Russell said it was pretty well written. Thank you, Russell. So great to see many friends in the audience, too many to name, but this is a fabulous turnout to honor Russell, and terrific job for you, the museum. I'm not here today as an expert on Utah artists or art. Most of you, or many of you here, can do that talk, have and could, so I won't speak directly to that, but I am here to and able to speak on the importance of beautiful art in our lives, and the art of artists that came way before us and artists that will continue beyond us. From the artists of massive prominence of Maynard, Dixon, Thomas Moran, to the relative obscurity to Everett Royce. Utah has been a magnet and a gathering place for probably more artists per capita than any other state. I have not spent a great deal of time in Utah, but I'm happy to say I think my first two times were at Maynard Dixon Country in 2006 and 2007. You know, the Binghams have done an amazing job at the Maynard Dixon home over there. So that's when I first met Russell. It was 2006 and 2007. So I said, Russell who? Russell who? Now we know. But I have often said that there's clearly something in the water in Utah, because the quality of art, the amazing skills that are here, who are honed here or developed here, absolutely amazing. You have one of the richest art heritages in the country. I do love your state. It is arguably the most, and this is coming from a guy born in Colorado, lives in Wyoming, and Utah is arguably one of the most beautiful and extraordinary states in the entire United States. It's no wonder that so many artists have come and stayed. You know, in the mid and later 1800s, artists often accompanied government survey expeditions, and their resulting artworks have told some of the greatest stories. So almost verbatim what you said about Thomas Moran and his coming to the West. So I have that story exactly, him accompanying the Hayden expedition to Yellowstone in 1871 with William Henry Jackson and the watercolors that he did. And then the next year, his masterpiece that appeared before Congress in 1872 created Yellowstone National Park. And just adding on to that story, Thomas Moran was an important figure at the Salmagundi Club. So in my introduction, thank you, talking about the Salmagundi Club, so Russell wanted me to speak to this. It's a great story, and that is, the Salmagundi Club is a strange name, but a magnificent place in New York City. It was founded in 1871, the same year that Moran was in Yellowstone, and it's an association, a social and artistic club comprised of artists and art lovers. And that was started in 1871. And when Moran was in Yellowstone, he didn't know that just just a bit later, he would become the 4th president of the Salmagundi Club. And it is a very prestigious art organization. And a big part of that history of that club was the fact that they would take large trips, and many, many artists would go from New York City out here. They'd go to Colorado, they'd go to, Carl Rungus went to Wyoming and to Canada, and the Taos Society of Artists, Blumenshine and Sharp and Kaus, they were in Taos. They were all at Salmagundi. And it was not like, you know, all these great artists were born out here. Some were a little later on, but many of them were from the East Coast, from Pittsburgh or Cincinnati or New York City. They studied in Paris, And then they were back at Salmagundi. And we had, when we bought the building that we're in now in 1917, they immediately built an extension in the back of that building that was upstairs, a major gallery about the size of this room. And right below it was another gallery, but playroom, and they had 5 pool tables, 5 10-foot pool tables, a bar and private dining. And what would happen around those pool tables and in the bar and the dining, those artists such as Moran, who had been here, are telling the great tales of the American West, talking about Utah, talking about Yellowstone, talking about the Grand Canyon. And Moran went on to lead expeditions of club presidents, in 1901 and 1911. And those artists did amazing paintings of your area and the entire American West. So that's the Moran connection there. And that I mentioned the Taos founders. So what happens in an art community? You get the multiple artists that went from New York City, Cincinnati to Taos, founded the art colony there. Well, that developed an entire community in Taos that became quite major. And that's one of those beautiful effects that the art industry, if you can be business-like enough to say that, has on a community. I just looked tonight at this huge crowd of people in this great museum. So here is part of that ripple effect that the beauty of art brings into our lives and that we want to take part in. In today's world, even though there are artists and galleries are in abundance, there are still homes that don't hang original art, maybe not even prints. That what has happened is, we have not energized the appetite for people to understand just what it is that art does to enrich the life that you lead, to bring the calmness, the wonder of the outdoors into your inner world inside your home. What we have here tonight with the art that you'll see downstairs is art that does enrich your life, art that actually you could take home at some point if you were interested. You have art that is clear, defined. I say art that is representational, like this representational art. It's art that needs no explanation. Art that honors the land. Art that elevates it. Art that is an exclamation point on creation. Art has the ability to be a blessing to its viewer. It is to be celebrated, and that is what we are doing here tonight. Russell didn't want me to talk about him, but let me tell you what you have here. You have a passionate, intelligent painter, an artist that has vision and the exceedingly great skill to see it through. He is an outstanding example of what is great about Utah artists and Utah art. He is one of the finest landscape painters that is painting in America today. You are very, very fortunate to have him living among you. Can you imagine 80 years ago if you were living in the community where Maynard Dixon was and were able to buy paintings and beautiful artwork that were pretty reasonable? Well, Russell's work is very reasonable, and it is a joy to be able to own his work and to share it with the world around us. I learned something very special about Russell while we were here. So this book was on the coffee table. So this is the art of G. Russell Case. Russell, can you come up here? So this is Mountain Crest High School Visual Arts Portfolio. And you got to help me because I'm holding this mic, but if you'd open that up and and it's too fragile to pass around. It's too important to pass around.
They can't see it. There's no way they can see it.
No, they can't see it, but, you know, well, here you go. You've got this handsome guy here, and then the records of sales. Now, you know, this all goes hand in hand with Gary, because Gary is the I didn't know, but Russell informed me that, you know, he would paint his watercolors, and his dad, Gary, would be your agent, really. You know, he was out there representing you at the banks and the whatnot. Can you just tell us a little bit about that? Do you mind?
Yep. Yeah, real quick. When I was in high school, I started painting watercolors pretty serious and a lot, and Dad he knew how to frame them and make them look presentable, and then he would just kind of line up shows at the local little banks and little places, and so I was, you know, I could sell a watercolor for $25, or I could go mow a lawn for $7.50. And so that, you do the math there. And I mean, my dad just did that my whole life. And when I was in college, he put me through college, you know, I'd send him paintings wherever they were living and wherever I was. And he would go out to decorators, to people, and just you know, just keep sending me checks and get me through school. So yeah, Dad was. I
think that's incredible. I mean, just you know, a round of applause for Gary. So this is part of your portfolio then?
This is how you put together a portfolio back then. My dad was a master graphic artist, so we just, I mean, these are original drawings and then some photographs, and this is how he put it together. And this was, yeah, this was the what I had to do for the Sterling Scholar when I was a senior in high school. And so this was my dad's deal. I don't know how this thing came in. I think Taylor dug this out of my...
Well, it's really a real treasure for your family and your history. And I had no idea about your dad. And so it's been a lifelong family affair in your art world. So before we go downstairs, I thought we'd have just a little time. I wanted to just have a couple of questions with Russell. I'm curious. So you're having a successful art career, but I'm sure there are some things in the art scene in general that you think, I didn't tell him anything I was going to say, by the way, but that you are passionate about, that you would like to see better for the art world in general, how more people can be exposed to art, what we can do to make a bigger impact so the beauty of art that so enriches our lives can get a little more traction or further out.
Sure, that was the whole objective in this show, and the idea of when we got together on this, I wanted to use what you're going to see downstairs is what they were talking about in what we call field studies, but not only field studies, but I do a lot of like what I call studio studies. So when I go into the studio to start to work, you say, okay, it's like a writer, maybe a musician. You have to start somewhere, and so you start with small ideas that you grow, and so you go outside on location and do small works. If you get one out of those, out of 7 or 8 that might work, that you keep, that's about the percentage. But so what this is accumulation over 30 or plus years of these, a lot of field studies and a lot of just studio studies, things that sparked their painting series that lead. The goal is to get a large painting out of something. You get kind of traction in this business when you can do like larger works, from museums to see. But so I had all this work, and I really want to show up that a lot of my market is out of state, and it's a Southwest theme. And so I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to do that. And what I want to do with it is like these guys are talking, is kind of enhance this idea or re-enhance it of the Utah landscape and the painters. There's been such an increase of the postmodern movement and the thoughts of things that this almost becomes just a bygone. in a lot of places, especially, you know, in the ideas of some of the universities that I went to and came out of. When I look back at the guys they were talking about, that's not carried on, and there's reasons we could talk about that. My idea was to kind of revigorate the area for the painters of Utah, and I hope this show does that. I hope that it's interesting to you. And I think, did that answer? Yeah,
that's good. Yeah. So if shows like this, with the leadership that your museum is showing here in this, and having done this, hopefully there'll be other communities around. I mean, the richness of the art in Utah is over the top. I started to think, well, maybe I'll make a list of names that I know, living artists that are painters in Utah. Well, there were too many, and someone would have been left out for sure. So it's a remarkable state and remarkable opportunity, and it'd be super to see a groundswell of this type of thing scattered around the state with opportunities, whether it's a one-person show or a group show in many different venues, because it's just wonderful what you've got here. So I don't think we want to go too long, so I won't ask another question. I'll hand the mic back to you. And, oh, well, a couple more things.
Oh, no, we're not going down yet. I'm not going to pass up an opportunities like this don't come around, where I can see faces like this. I'm going to try to keep this short, but I have to thank some people. And I know you say, oh, here we go. We're going to go through the thanks. But like he's saying, there's so many good painters in Utah. And I know if I start trying to list names, you know how you kind of, you forget as soon as somebody hands you a mic, you forget. But, you know, Jim Morgan is one of our country's best wildlife painter, and just artist in general. He's here today, right here on the end. I know George Hanrahan's here, one of Utah's finest painters in the likes of LeConte Stewart. And I know there's other ones here, and I'm, you know, a lot of the people I painted with, we go outside and paint in the groups, Lori Eskelson and Bonnie, and you guys, I can't, and I know I'm going to forget some important ones, and then, you know, this show, you know, he was talking about how hard it was for these artists to work and what they had to do to get their materials. I drove here in a Toyota Tundra, and the materials I use, I just order them and they come to my door. My framer's here, Travis, thanks for everything. I couldn't do any of this without Travis. He's down in Cedar City, and we work together just like hand in glove. I mean, it's just incredible. Him and his wife will run up and meet me, and his boys. The guy who builds the panels I paint on and glues this stuff together, I started to do that. It's such a hassle and time consuming. And then I meet Tim, and he's down in Ogden. Thanks, Tim, for making panels and just keep doing that, and framers. So, and like they mentioned, Paul and Susan Bingham are here, and they drove up from Maynard Dixon's place down in southern Utah by Kanab. And what a joy to just see him again. Me and Paul did. He, at that turn of my career when I was going from watercolor into oil, and I met Paul Bingham. It's a great story, but we won't go into that. But what a journey. He took me to the national scene. I didn't even know what to do. There's some collectors here like Michael Edson, I can see now. He used to come around and gather back when we used to do little slides, 35mm slides, and I'd give him leaflets of slides, and he would go to all the shows and auctions, and he would hand them to gallery owners and people, and then he'd come back and tell me what they said, and hey, these guys might want to look at your work. But he would bring people to the studio. The Hinkleys are here, great collectors that have always been a great support of me. Swendels, I think Steve and Sonny are here, and Art Swendel. I haven't seen you guys yet, but thank you so much for supporting this. And there's Art and Steve. They just walked in, and Sonny. I was just saying how great it is to have the support that we have, and then the artist friends, my hunting buddies. Brian's here, and the mayor was here. Thanks, if he's still in here. Thank you for coming down, Mayor Bott, and being here. So, man, who am I missing out? You know my family. They've talked about that. My dear wife, who went through the whole thing with me and supported me. My dad, every time it's just, well, my dad did this and my dad did that. So, He's been there the whole time. My family, my daughters are here. Morgan and Taylor's in the back with one of our grandchild. Her husband Nick. My youngest son Cooper. He's right here. He's my best buddy ever. My little sister is here, Melinda. So thanks so much. My stepmom Ruth. Man, I hate to thank people because my basketball buddy Kevin Jensen's here. I played for 35 years. My neighbor Mike that let me paint the back of his house. I have a painting down there that I like a lot, a 1620. David owns it. It's called Mike's Place. But I live out there by the river on the way to Corinne, and Mike Ravenberg lives right in back of me, and I painted a scene down his slough looking at the Bear River. So just things like that. My church family's here, my pastor's here. It's only, it is by the grace of God we're here, and the wind and the breath is in our lungs. So thank you so much for coming. This was way more than we anticipated. And it's exactly now straight up, and it's about time to open the door. So I'll quit now. Thanks.
On behalf of the Brigham City Museum of Art and History and the entire Brigham City team, I want to thank our speakers and thank all of you for coming tonight. Thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your evening.